Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Web of Wyrd with me, your host, David Farrell, and my co-host, Pete Jackson-Main. Hey, Pete, how you doing?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a fantastic Beltane weekend. We've been celebrating, and it's all good, wonderful. And we drove back yesterday from Somerset to Cambridge in a clear run all the way. It took only 3.5 hours, and the entire route was lined with hawthorn trees. And I think we're going to be talking about hawthorn a bit later. So
We are, of course. This weekend was a powerful one, right? We had the
yeah.
the solar eclipse on the new moon on Saturday, and then we had Beltane, the 1st of May, on Sunday, and there's a lot of themes linking the two. And yes, we're absolutely going to link back into those a little bit later in the show. But first, I think we want to start with a little bit of a roundup of this week's news, right? And we're better to start than with our favorite mascot of total and utter mayhem, Mr. Johnson. What have you got on Blow Joe this week for us, Pete?
Well, I haven't got very much. I think you've got more than I have on that stuff. But what I was looking at was the fact that, what's happened to Partygate? That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, it kind of rumbles on, and occasionally it spikes, and people, oh, yes, that happened. Oh, it's terrible. And then the next thing happens, and it's gone away again. But it did emerge in the UK news this week that Starmer also had a party, a birthday party with cake. So, so he's kind of in the frame for disobeying lockdown rules as well. And whether this is just some kind of sort of tit for tat, oh, you accuse me, so I'll accuse you, what truth or basis, in fact, I mean, we are talking about the tabloid press in the UK. So when they start to report something, you've got to be a little bit careful about what you believe. But I've often said that, for those who wish Johnson and the Tories out of the picture, be careful what you wish for, because what's coming up behind, and this is usually the case with British politics, what comes after you get rid of your favourite person to hate is often a lot worse. And this has happened several times in my experience of watching British politics. So I'm not a fan of Starmer's in any way, shape or form. Probably should not be quite so partisan on this show, but I do wonder what, and I don't know whether you want me to mention now the Trilateral Commission. That might sort of be
well, let's bring it into the mix, because I think it's an important point.
Yeah, it was unearthed by some independent journalists that Starmer is a member of a group called the Trilateral Commission. And I looked into it before we started today, and I found out that, I mean, it was sort of, the news piece was set up as, journalists don't like to report conspiracy theories these days because it gets them a bad reputation and people don't like them, and they kind of, they get humiliated by it. But poor journalists, but you don't even have to believe conspiracy theories, because this is fact. It's out in the open. Everybody knows that Keir Starmer is a member of this group. Now, this group was founded in 1975 by none other than David Rockefeller. He had somebody whose name I can't pronounce as a co-conspirator in that as well. But its basic agenda is New World Order, and it's anti-democratic. It's sort of saying that the governments of the planet, of countries, but of the planet ultimately, should be left to the elite, and that is, if you give the plebs voting power, they will mess things up for the New World Order. So that's the kind of level that he seems to be on, and it doesn't surprise me at all. I think that the Labour Party is well and truly infiltrated by now. I think what we saw with the virtual destruction of the Labour Party actually under Corbyn was probably the dying gasp of a great British institution.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, so much just to respond on there, but the last point I think is an important one. And Corbyn still sits in Parliament as an independent, I think genuinely he was probably a good guy. I always felt that his heart was in the right place, but he was completely undermined by forces within his party that really were not, I think, of the Labour energy. And the more we look at politics, the more we can see infiltration. And I'm a politics graduate, and I've studied it my entire life. And I've even worked in politics for the Green Party some years ago, before I became completely disillusioned with what I realised was just a bunch of inane idiots. I got to do one of the leaders' debates for the Welsh Assembly, and I got to go back in the spin room to support our Green Party leader at that time. This was a good few years ago now, before I became disillusioned with how the Green Party got infiltrated, like most of the sort of lefty parties. And I observed really just the Labour and Conservative boys really acting like school kids and taunting each other, and the level of banality was inane. And I just sat there and thought, you know, this is a waste of my time. This is the level that British politics is at. There's no chance for any kind of other new energies or parties to come in, because the system is set up only really ever to serve one party, but with the illusion that maybe there's two, and everything else around that is really just a facade. And but to come back to the Labour Party and to, as somebody once called him, steer karma, yeah, you know, that's all out there. And I think that if we are sort of taking a more overview of what's going on, I think that the sort of the Me Too-esque revelations that are now coming forth after one of the Tory MPs was caught watching material he shouldn't have been watching in the House of Commons, although he did say that he was watching a show on tractors, and that whatever images appeared were totally in error. I'm not kind of sure what websites he was looking at that have tractors.
Well, some tractors, to be fair, some tractors do have almost naked women draped over them to sell them, apparently.
Is that right? That's not a subculture that I'm aware of.
No, there was an article about it in some news program that I saw. There was big, you know, why do we have to have naked women on tractors? Well, to sell the tractors, of course.
Right.
It was a thing. Yeah.
Not because you need to grow crops or anything. But so, you know, I think that it's interesting to see that story has kind of emerged, and off the back of that, apparently this week there was a sort of a committee meeting, I think mostly of female MPs who have brought forth a whole host of complaints, and I don't remember the exact number, but it's over 50 male MPs are now being investigated by the committee in Parliament that is responsible for that kind of thing. So, you know, and we've got a local election in Britain coming up in 3 days' time. Like you just said, I think that there's a very interesting dynamic at play where it feels like there are so many things stacked up with Partygate, and, you know, that's a funny one, right? You know, that the defining factor of Partygate is whether you got to have cake or not whether you were social distancing or wearing masks due to a killer virus, which was on the loose, which was the reason you're locked down in the first place, but really whether you got cake. You know, we can debate whether Keir and Boris got their cake and ate it, or what happened thereafter.
Yeah, or maybe they had cake, but the Tories had bread. You know, to go back to Marie Antoinette, you know, basically. You know, the famous thing where she said, you know, let them eat cake, because the poor people, the peasants, had no bread.
Right.
So anyway, there's all sorts of things around that. I just want to say something else about Keir Starmer. He was at my school. He went to my school, which was Reigate Grammar School. He's younger than me. So you know, I didn't know him. I think he was in year 1 when I was in year 6 or whatever. But one thing I do know about him is that he was beaten in a public speaking competition by my sister.
Brilliant. You have many weird claims to fame, bro, which maybe we'll explore another.
Yeah, well, you know, Karis, if you're listening, big up.
Yeah, fair dues, man. That's a good one. But yeah, so like you said, I think we should always be wary of getting rid of one leader party system and immediately ushering in something else without necessarily investigating it at depth, because you know, whatever we might think about our political system at the moment, it's, well, I don't know, is it serving a function? Is it serving a positive function? Who knows? But yeah, you heard it here.
I kind of go along with Frank Zappa on that one. Politics is the entertainment division of the military industrial complex. I don't even whether he might not have said it, but he certainly did say it at some point. It might have come from somewhere else. Yeah. Well,
if I had to go out on a limb, and you heard it here, heard it here first, folks, there may well be a snap general election in Britain sometime in the next couple of months. And don't be surprised if miraculously Keir Starmer sweeps to power. I'm not going to go out on too much of a limb and say when or where, but my gut feeling has been for a while that is something that is being shaped up to be delivered, however you understand that. So, so that's our mascot of mayhem. He's mostly been getting a face full of cake and dodging fines and generally cozying up to interesting individuals on the world stage. But another one of our more interesting contemporaries, Mr. Elon Musk, or as you've nicknamed him, the Musketeer, has also been in the news this week for a number of interesting reasons, hasn't he?
He has indeed. And of course, the Twitter thing is the big one. And a lot of moaning going on because he actually promised to solve world poverty, but didn't, bought Twitter instead. And he's putting himself out as a champion of free speech. And I think the thing about the Musk is that you don't really know what to think about him. I've talked to a lot of people about Musk, and nobody knows how to call it. And we were talking earlier as well. He seems to sort of defy any kind of categorization. I remember, the first time I was aware of him was when he appeared on some kind of private TV channel being interviewed, smoking a Santa Maria cigarette, and he.
Otherwise known as the spliff, right?
Spliff, yeah. It's huge controversy. How can he do this? He's perverting our youngsters and all the rest of it. And he actually was forced to apologize and sort of distance himself from the practice. But I strongly suspect he hasn't actually distanced himself from the practice, because I don't know, the sort of scale of his imagination is something else for sure. But you were saying that you understood that he was no longer into artificial intelligence.
Well, I've heard from a number of sources this week that yes, that he has gone back on his more transhuman thinking. Maybe he switched up strains of what he's smoking and he's got a different vibe going now. Who knows?
Can only hope.
Yeah, and also, again, just being careful of absorbing too much from the media, but he's come up in the deposition of the court case between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard as being involved in an interesting freeway situation, let's say. So he's getting around is the Musk. He's certainly putting himself about and creating a general amount of controversy. He's maybe not quite at the level of our favourite mascot of mayhem, but he's certainly putting in a bold claim to perhaps carve his own niche in that direction, isn't he?
Yeah, he certainly is. But I was also, interested in the fact that he's sort of come head to head with the bozzer, because the government are currently involved in legislation which is due to be passed anytime soon to require social media platforms to censor and remove offensive posts and illegal posts. So he's and the news item went something like, the British government threatens to jail Elon Musk if he does this with Twitter, if he makes it into a free speech channel. And I don't think they've ever said, actually, I don't think Boris has said, Elon, you're running into danger here. I'm going to put you in jail if you carry on doing this. But it's really the thrust of the legislation that the British government is pursuing at the moment is absolutely against free speech, as always, and is going, incrementally taking more and more and more freedom away, and organizing the media and the press and information channels along their own lines. And there was another article about, the drastic reduction in choice in terms of information channels. I think we're down to about 6 major ones on the whole planet now, that are sort of all of them, of course, controlled by the same people. But Musk comes along and says, oh, it's okay, why can't everybody say what they want? And this is what I'm going to do when I get Twitter. And of course, he is going to be the antithesis. He's going to be the antichrist as far as they're concerned. If he does anything of the kind, he's going to be he's going to end up like Julian Assange, basically. So
yeah, I mean, at different times, and you just alluded to it there, and I'm not so gemmed up on this, although I did look at it the other day. But of course, in the final sessions before Parliament, I think it's going for a break at the moment. I can't remember the exact word for it, but they ushered through 6 major pieces of legislation, a couple of which the House of Lords tried to block, but in the end couldn't. And in amongst all of that is some of this stuff to do with freedom of speech, and particularly the one that's got a lot of people going is the clamp down on the ability to protest peacefully. This all got ushered through, I think it was last week, very, very quietly, except for those people who were watching it, of course, the activists and so on. And so there is some pretty severe legislation that's just been passed in British Parliament that perhaps most people are probably not aware of right now.
Absolutely.
I think that's where the Musk is likely to meet the mascot of mayhem in a head-to-head. Now that would be a cabinet discussion around that infamous table that served cake back at one of the party gates to Boris. That would be quite the meeting, I think, to be a fly on the wall at the Musk
It would.
and the mascot of Mayhem coming together.
The Musketeer and the mascot of Mayhem. Yeah.
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 So, sorry, go
yeah.
on.
No, I was going to say, talking about freedom of speech,
Yeah.
and things that happened to the last Web of Weird podcast. I wonder, what your thoughts about that are.
Well, yes, for those of our listeners who listen regularly, of course, you'll realize that our last episode got banned on YouTube. So I definitely take that as some sort of badge of honor in some ways. But it's also not super convenient for reaching people. I mean, the show, of course, is up on wisdomhub.tv anyway, but yeah, we got banned, and apparently we were in what's the word to say, conflagration of World Health Organization directives. I appealed the decision with I'm still not 100% sure what got us banned, but I suspect talking about the side effects of the aforementioned medical procedure that's been offered to people. Somehow we got on the wrong side of that by perhaps alluding to situations where there may have been side effects, which apparently, according to the World Health Organization, are not real. So we have to be very careful about how we talk about this, but there are in the mainstream media, so we're not really going into conspiracy, but there are reports of lots of people having problems with their eyes, right? I think you, as an iridologist, know quite a bit about this.
Well, I not particularly as an iridologist, but I did happen to pick up this bit. But talking about blindness as a side effect of one of the streams of medication, and it's quite serious actually. I mean, it's total blindness, permanent blindness, temporary blindness, partial blindness, unilateral blindness, all sorts of different kind of and other eye problems, which are not itemized, accounting for something like 8,000 adverse reactions since the rollout of the said medical procedure. And I have to look into this a little bit more. As a practitioner myself, I do see people who have suffered since undergoing the procedure. As I said the last time, I haven't yet encountered any eye problems, I have to say. So in the interests of absolute impartiality, I'd have to say I can't verify this, but I was interested to see it. It's vascular in nature, because the whole thing is about the attrition upon the vascular system, and the eye particularly relies on some very, very fine microvasculature. So eyesight basically relies on very fine vasculature, which is what disappears if you have really bad diabetes and your retinal capillary beds atrophy. So anything that messes with the circulation on that level is likely to affect the eyes.
Right. I mean, again, in our intimate way, or in the inimitable way, rather, we're trying to bring into focus just reports. Like, we're not really making a comment either way. I mean, we're both healers in our different ways, and we reflected that in the last show. But there are other reports that are sort of emerging, which are being reported by the mainstream media as being possible adverse reactions to the various procedures that have been offered around the world. And another two, which I think are very interesting, are the reports of outbreaks of hepatitis in Britain in children, which obviously is a liver-related issue, but also increasing numbers of reports of doctors asking patients if they can blood test them for AIDS. Which is quite a disturbing thought to have, but there are definitely reports, and I've got this firsthand from a friend whose a colleague had this happen to them at their local GP, and they were asked if they'd had the aforementioned procedures, and they said no, and they said, okay, we don't need to bother them. So again, skirting controversy, but this has been reported in the mainstream media, and just reflecting on this with the eye issues, there are, and another interesting story that emerged last week was of 15 tennis players at the Miami Open in the US unable to finish their matches, all again, according to the report I read, having received procedures. So, it's happening all over the place, and I think that the blocking, particularly of some of the material, which is not even rabbit hole stuff, but just reflecting on what's being reported, is really not helpful to anybody. So yeah, I'm not sure where to take this particular point, but I think it's just interesting to observe.
Yeah,
you know?
it is. I mean, in the interest, again, in the interests of impartiality and two-sidedness, if you like, the hepatitis story, I did look into that because immediately I saw it, I thought, ah, here we go. You know, this is going to be another one. And what they're saying in the reports that I read is that the children concerned were not had not had the procedure. So there seems to be another problem, and we're not quite sure what that is yet. So I'm watching that one as we speak, but I've nothing more on it at the moment.
Well, as an energetic healer, I can report on having worked on people who've had the procedure and people who haven't, and there are very clear differences energetically, very clear, as I'm sure other healers out there who do similar work will say, and I've even conversed with quite a few. You know, so it's like, how to say, there are energies, let's put it that way, toxicities being transmitted across, let's say, the divide, which are definitely affecting people's health. I have seen it and repeatedly removed it from pretty much everybody's energy.
This is a good point. Yeah, this is a good point. Yeah,
you know, what is being transmitted, I don't particularly want to share on this recording, but if people want to know more, they can reach out to me and I can explain more. But there are reports of people now being found with graphene being transmitted. And I can definitely testify to the fact that everybody is getting massively over-toxified with heavy metals. That's a consistent theme across the divide. I would say that in general, the procedure is increasing that level of toxicity in the body, which is not good for the liver. So, you know, there are links there that are easy to kind of join the dots with. And it's not just necessarily about the procedure, it's about the after effects, the so-called shedding that has been talked about, right? The viral shedding. You know, we can understand that in different ways, but anyway.
I can totally understand that. And again, in my practice, I've seen clear examples of this as well. But we have to be careful because, you know, it's hearsay, anecdote, and we're just, you know, these things have to be subject to proper scientific scrutiny so that they can be whitewashed. And sorry, I didn't say that. But I've been, listen, I wanted to say something else about this because I was involved in, as I said to you earlier, I was involved in government level consultations about herbal medicine and trying to protect my profession. And there was this huge endeavor, this huge initiative to go out and find as many adverse effects from herbs as possible. So they were sort of really dredging them up from everywhere they could get them, yellow card systems, newspaper reports, wherever, all over Europe, trying to dredge up as many adverse reports about herbs, preparatory to getting them somehow regulated or even banned. I mean, in 1994, there was a big initiative by the government to completely close down the herbal industry. And the latest consultation that I was in, I don't do this sort of thing anymore, hopefully, touch wood, because it's a toxic environment to be in for sure. You have to sit with a bunch of civil servants and try and persuade them that, you know, they have no idea what herbs are all about or what herbalists are all about, and they just don't get it. But they're absolutely convinced that herbs are like drugs, that if you don't regulate them, if you don't have all these controls, if you don't license them, then people are going to get poisoned. So they're dredging up. And the typical one that they go for is that back in 1992 in Belgium, there were 2 people who died of kidney failure after taking a herbal formula for weight loss. It actually transpired. I mean, a lot of things I could say about that case, and we haven't got time to go into it in detail. But in the case concerned, actually, it was 2 medical doctors who had administered that. And there were certain herbs in there that we would never have used at all, let alone for helping people lose weight, because they're known to be toxic to the kidneys in particular. So you know, this is the danger of reporting sometimes as well, is that when you miss out key details of context, you create situations in which the wrong understandings can almost you know, and I'm not exaggerating here, almost got herbal medicine taken off the list of things people were permitted to do in the UK. But for all their searching, they got nowhere. And I remember I was teaching, I was talking to the guy who was then the deputy chief medical officer So he's no longer in that position, but he would have been just under that whoever was the Chris Whitty of the day. And I had personal relationship and conversations with him about this. And I rang him up and I said, look, you've put this document in front of this consultation group and it says, you know, adverse effects of herbs. I said, you go through this paper and there's nothing more recent than 20 years ago that you're bringing forward, because this was in 2014. And B, there's really not very much of it. And there are alternative commentaries on a lot of it as well. So he then said to me something I've never forgotten. He's a very wise man. I probably better not say his name. It might get him into trouble. He's a very wise man. He said to me, confidentially, he said, that's exactly why I think this is a very good paper. And I'd let that sink in, and I realized what he was telling me was the paper is absolute rubbish. If we bring it to the meeting, it will be seen to be rubbish and you will win your case. And I just suddenly saw, aha, he's been really, really clever about this. I won't even go into who drew up the paper. It was actually a bunch of other herbalists. So the herbal medicine profession is a little bit tricky in several ways. But the point I'm making about this really is that they are, you know, if a herb causes a side effect, there is uproar and we're all, you know, damned as charlatans. But thousands and thousands upon thousands of side effects are being swept under the carpet in this latest medical initiative.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, it's kind of, and again, I revert back to the book I mentioned the other week, Barbara Griggs's New Green Pharmacy. It kind of, she goes into this in some detail, but it's interesting, like the paradoxical nature of a couple of cases being extrapolated into basically trying to ban plant use as opposed to what you've just described. And it's just like, well, you know, how come that supposed, what's the word I'm looking for here? Level of discernment about medicines being issued seems to be very lopsided.
Yeah.
You know, one of the classic ones that often gets wheeled out is St. John's wort, right? They really did a number on that amazing plant, you know, and so, you know, in the end, it comes down to personal choice, I think, and you know, everyone has a choice which way to go, but we should be allowed to have that choice. I think that's the important thing, and I know that you guys back in the 80s had to fight very hard for the fact that we still have medicines available herbally, you know, and also the flower essence industry, which I'm a part, also had to, I think maybe it was in the early 90s that they had to go through a piece, but you cannot sell herbal plant essences as medicine. They have to be sold as a food product.
Yeah.
So there's lots of kind of interesting bits and pieces around all of that. But we are going to talk about plants today, and there's a final just news piece I just want to quickly bring in. Guernsey, at the center of the cannabis world, it turns out, now issuing licenses like they are going out of fashion, apparently, and because of Guernsey's unique status within the British Empire, somehow they're able to get away with this. So Guernsey has now decided that they're going all in with pot. So I'm not sure what to make of this story, but it's an interesting one, and I suspect that it's got legs, because you know, Guernsey is outside of the remit of the mainland, and I felt for a while that the incumbent party in charge have been itching to find a way to legalize this plant, because there's a lot of money in it, as US and Canada have shown, but they probably face a certain amount of inertia in their lock stock supporters who vote them in every time. So interesting, but where there is business and money, you will normally find conservative MPs. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're involved in this somehow too. So any thoughts on this one, Pete? Can you see Guernsey becoming the new Amsterdam?
Well, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? But I mean, I think that the whole, you know, the key word in that report is medical,
Right.
because you know what happens in Amsterdam is completely different in a sense. You can go and partake of a social substance in a free spirited way, and I think that was always the big attraction of Amsterdam. Fungi too, apparently. I've not done that there, but medical licensing is a completely different matter. And of course, it won't have escaped some people's notice probably that Tory people close to the Tory party, shall we say this,
Mhm.
in the past have been seen to have hefty financial stakes in that industry. So I'm sure that they're looking for somewhere to roll that out and see, what they can realize in terms of profits. No doubt about it whatsoever. What worries me, of course, is that I think when you start treating plants like that, they will get somehow they will make sure that you don't get very far with it, or they will create other problems. I mean, I obviously a clear parallel in a way is the use of tobacco in the West. Sort of brought over into the West and then commodified, so to speak, and the attrition on health that's caused, which I know is always. I'd be interested. I don't think I've talked to you about that one actually, David, but I'm just wondering how you respond to that, because clearly there are issues there, but I know a lot of people like yourself who have been initiated into tobacco in the right way will still use it. But what do you think about the tobacco industry? I mean, that's what I would look to in determining where the marijuana industry is going to go in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a deep connection with tobacco. That's true. I am an initiated tabacero, and I work with tobacco a lot. I mean, just as an interesting kind of thought, like generally, if I want to partake of tobacco, I work with American Spirit Tobacco, which is a really, really nice tobacco grown by indigenous people in North America without additives. I will only in desperation in certain moments really smoke anything else other than natural grown tobacco, of course. I think it's interesting out here in Mexico, I'm able to buy American Spirit Tobacco in its original packet, which is very nice, in the yellow and blue packets. It doesn't have any of these horrible pictures plastered all over them, which are basically spelling the tobacco into giving you cancer. I think it's often worth repeating that in Europe, tobacco is often seen as a cancer-inducing plant, and yet in Americas, North, Central, and South America, it's regarded as really the mother healing plant. So healer or killer, interesting, right?
It is. Yeah, I know there's a lot. Maybe we should do tobacco at some point, because there's a lot in that. I remember that. I can't remember the guy's name. I think he came from Ecuador at the Plant Spirit Consciousness event a few years ago, who said that said something about how the population's looking at the way Westerners were using tobacco, sort of said, well, we're not going to tell them, they'll find out by themselves, and it's not really the way to do it. I thought that was very interesting.
Yes, I remember that particular topic. Yeah, and I think also if you want to get an idea of how legalization can go, there are, I think, probably many good things to what's happened in North America on that front, but there are many inequalities about how the licenses get distributed, particularly across ethnic groups, etc., etc. So interesting story, but a good segue, I think, really into the second half of the show, because cannabis, as far as I'm concerned, really is the goddess. She encompasses the energy of unconditional love. And once you've worked with her for a while, and particularly in the line of work I do, she really opens up the potential for higher mind consciousness. And that is really where we're at, folks, right now, I believe, in the journey that we're on as humanity, and in this great transitional cycle that we are in. And if you haven't realized, that is what's going on. We are transcending into different types of humans right now. And there are various possibilities being offered to us on that front. But one of them is very much a reconnection back to the goddess, back to Mother Earth, back to nature. And that, of course, that really ties in with a lot of the astrology that's been going on recently, but really also the whole Uranus and Taurus piece. Taurus is about the body. It's also about the land in the earth. And, it's about grassroots. And it's like there's this movement now energetically to pull us back to remembering who we are, why we're here, but also by working with the plants. And this is where Santa Maria really has helped me a lot, is opening up that higher mind space to be able to communicate with other plant intelligence. And once we start to be able to do that, as you can, and there's a number of other people I know really starting to feel intuitively the language, the subtle quantum language of plants. It's not always so subtle, but is that as that happens, it's kind of developing, I guess, a new inner technology, which is something I talked about with Pam Gregory way back, actually, beginning of last year, in an inorganic versus organic video, which is super interesting to look back to now. But we've had this energy of the goddess all weekend. It's been Beltane. And let's talk a little bit about the energies of this weekend. You know, we had the powerful eclipse and the new moon, which was really powerful. And then we had this beautiful energy yesterday with Beltane, but we've also had this kind of Venus-Neptune conjunction, which has really brought through the sort of the energy of love and fertility and passion. So I'm wondering, how was your weekend, bro?
Well, it was spectacular on all fronts where that's concerned. I mean, I did, as I said to you earlier, we did go and celebrate Beltane with some mutual friends, actually, and we had a fantastic, absolutely epic weekend with it. And we were also dieting on Hawthorn, the Queen of the May, which I think was really, really powerful. But for me personally, I mean, one of the most powerful plant spirit connections that I've ever formed so far. I've been in it not too long, as you know, but you know, was last October when I connected with Hawthorn in a way that I was truly blown away by. I couldn't even talk about it. In fact, I still haven't talked about it. To be honest, it was just so personal, I guess, really, as well. Mm-hmm. So doing that, dieting on Hawthorn and fasting at the same time, doing the Beltane fire, really just kind of honoring that sacred transition, and yeah, being super aware of what was being beamed at us from outer space through these various astrological configurations. Very much a time of kind of, yeah, passion, compassion, love. I mean, it was brimming over, actually, in terms of the heart energy there. And really kind of looking to the future and enabling. And for me personally, it was really about enabling my own future. You know, I'm at the stage in my life now where I have accomplished, I think, a reasonable level of success in what I do, but I'm not a person to rest on my laurels and stop there. I want to go on. I want to do more. I want to do different things. I want to continue to transform my life and do interesting and spectacular things. And I really felt the power to do that was really being beamed at me very, very powerfully over this weekend. I'm very much looking forward to working with that. It's with me as I speak. You can probably hear that. So yeah, for me, it was an eye and a heart opener of epic proportions. And you have a few other things to say about it, which I've also found interesting. The Uranus Taurus thing is very interesting too, because, you know, a lot of it was very Taurian in the sense that it was very earthed, and it was about the earth, and it was about actual sort of love for other beings and each other and all of that. But there was a kind of Uranian aspect to it as well. There was energy coming in that had a different resonance, a different vibration, and that was very detectable as well. It was much more kind of, you know, as you brought forward in that podcast you did with Pam Gregory, as you were just referring to, the difference between Taurus and Uranus. And actually the Uranian energy is also wonderful in its own right, as long as you can keep it in the natural balance. So that came through very strongly. We were working, I don't know whether you wanted to talk about Ormus a little bit, because we did have some of that around as well. That I found that incredibly Uranian rather than Taurian. I don't know whether you'd agree.
Yeah, let's bring Ormus in a little bit. I think that we can perhaps do a longer piece on Ormus in the future show. It's really interesting, and there's a lot to say, which I'm probably not able to do it justice. But I would say that Ormus is definitely more, Uranian, or possibly in terms of the zodiac, probably more Aquarian. It's very Aquarian. It feels like future technology. I've worked with Ormus. I had it with me for a while. I really connected powerfully to the spirit of Ormus last year. And I could feel it having a palpable effect in my field. But I think one of the interesting things about Ormus is it seems to work best when it's left to do what it needs to do. It doesn't seem to like being constricted into certain activities. So for those of our audience who aren't really aware, Ormus is kind of like white gold. It's made from sort of the seaweed saline process, from what I understand. We'll have to get some more expert advice on to talk about that. But essentially, it works really well in harmonizing. It seems to work very well in harmonizing the human energy field, but I also feel that it works really well in harmonizing earth energies. And again, that's also something I think we'll go into in a future show to do with geomancy and earth grids, because I think that's a very important part of what's been coming through with these cosmic beams over the last few weeks. But yeah, I mean, so many things just to bounce back to there. I mean, yeah, we've been pounded this week by solar flares and coronal mass ejections, which sounds very familiar to something else, right? Funnily enough. But also I think that what's been interesting is, and quite a few other astrologers have commented on this, so I'm going to bring in my own understandings, is this idea of an alignment that sort of, or an intersection with alignment even. And I think that what I've seen in my own world over the last few weeks is a culmination of everything that has gone before, to a sort of an end point almost, not necessarily an event horizon or a singularity, but a meeting point where two timelines have come together. And, you know, Pam's talked about this in previous shows, and I have too, this idea of different tracks leading in different directions with different trains. And it felt like this weekend perhaps was a sort of a major, possibly even final station on that route for people to make a choice. Which way am I going, this way or that way? And one route seems to involve Mother Earth, unconditional love, sovereignty, fertility, all of those things. And the other track seems to involve none of those things. So, you know, I think that that's the choice that humanity's at. And, you know, this whole weekend with the eclipse and with the energy of Beltane or Beltane, to me really speaks of all of these things. And there's been very strong Venusian energy. So the energy of love has been really strong, right? And you're definitely beaming it through the Hawthorn. Me, myself, and I've been with San Pedro, which is really another heart medicine over the last few weeks. It's really brought me into the heart. And we don't have so many Hawthorn trees in Mexico, but we have lots of other interesting plants. And I think that the heart energy and being in that space right now is of the utmost importance, because it's a different frequency. And the new earth is definitely here. It's here. It's not just a place on the earth, but it's also a place within inside of us. It's a way of being. It's a frequency. And, you know, I think it's also interesting that I think that this weekend really was the culmination of her story, the ancient past, his story, the more recent past, and the sort of a turning point and the opportunity to now step into a place of our story, which, you know, is the coming together of, I think, particularly masculine and feminine energies, and moving forwards with that in a place of divine love and divine respect, and equal and opposite. I really have spent a lot of time tuning to the Yin and Yang symbol recently and understanding it from this perspective, that in order to birth a new earth, there has to be a coming together of these energies in a balanced, harmonious, respectful, loving way. Otherwise, you know, we're just going to be repeating the mistakes of the past, right?
Totally. And you know, that's interesting actually, because I was reflecting as you said that you know, the masculine feminine thing, or let's say the politics, gender politics really is in essence what we're talking about here, has been a massive theme in my life too. I was around in the 70s when the women's movement really started gearing up. And a lot of the women involved in that involved in that movement were not only friends of mine, but also intimate friends, i.e. partners of mine as well. So I was kind of right in the middle of it. I had to face a lot of stuff. I had to face a lot of that, his story that I carried around, and recognize that it was not appropriate to bring that into a relationship, an equal and opposite relationship with a woman. And I think that was kind of, you know, I count my blessings for having gone through that period actually, because I think it was just so hugely important in what was to happen later. And as you say, going forward, we have to integrate those energies. We have to integrate male and female. We have to make a place for each other on this planet, which is totally honoring, respecting, and loving the other, rather than, you know, the agenda of control and you know, trying to put each other down, or criticizing, or the little memes and tropes that come out about, you know, men do this and women do that. Men are from what is it? Women are from Venus, men are from Mars, and never the twain shall meet, and all of that rubbish. And I think that yeah, I think Beltane is very much about that. Actually, it's about sort of, it's kind of, you know, traditionally it's about unbridled license of passion as well. And
You've obviously been reading the same folktale books that I've been reading.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. But you kind of get a little bit of a twinge of that from Hawthorn, but she's kind of on another level as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've done several diets with Hawthorn, and I kind of testify to that beautiful heart energy. She is the fairy May Queen. I'm just going to share a little story that I'm sure Hawthorn won't mind. So I made a Hawthorne Essence many years ago as part of our range, and it was a good essence. There was nothing wrong with it, but somehow it never sold that well, and there was something not quite right about it. And so I had to go back and look at it again a couple of years ago. And I sat and did a process with Hawthorn. In fact, I worked with Sacred Fungi on that particular occasion. And she came through really strongly and in the most gloriously beautiful appearance. And there was this kind of attitude of like, see how beautiful I am? Like, why don't you want to hang out with me more? You seem to want to hang out with all the other plants, but somehow I'm not getting included. Why can't I come and play with you on your adventures? It was this kind of attitude. And it was really strong. And I mean, in the more spiritual aspect, she is the fairy queen, so she carries a certain level of clout. And I had to sit there and just reflect on my relationship with Hawthorn and my own heart, and realize that I hadn't been paying her enough attention, and that I needed to go back and put more attention into an essence. And so I redid the essence, and it was a completely different experience. And Hawthorn has been much more strongly with me ever since. But I mean, there are many things to say about Hawthorn from a herbal point of view. Perhaps you could share a couple with us, Pete.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's heart medicine. That's what it is. And for example, and very importantly, I think in the traditional Chinese medicine, it's regarded as a Shen tonic. Shen being the spirit, and the spirit is seen to reside in the heart as part of the Chinese tradition. And I think that's just an amazing kind of tie up between East and West. If you want to talk about yin and yang and polarities and opposites as well, that the same ideas, are enshrined in, in an Oriental philosophy and in the Celtic and Druidic tradition as well, but in herbal medicine, which I think comes from that tradition essentially in these lands. We have all the sort of Greco-Roman stuff informing what we do as well, but even there's the elements, for example, there's the qualities and everything. The language that we use to discuss this, the language of energetics, is really the foundation language of healing, in my view. So I want to say something else about Hawthorn. I actually had, in the middle of the weekend, because I didn't want to miss the weekend, but I had arranged to give a lecture to the Society of Homeopaths about immunity. And so I kind of had it set up where we were so that I could actually use my computer, disappear for an hour and do this lecture. And I got into in front of these people, all these people on Zoom, all these worthy homeopaths on Zoom. And they'd been hearing lectures from, very high level lectures on, sort of scientific validation for various remedies and immunity and all the rest of it. And I just thought, actually, I can't be bothered with this. I said, right, okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 plants. And I talked about, what I was talking about was how we see plants in herbal medicine, because it's not, as many people think, echinacea, it's just an immune booster or something. It gets herbs into trouble. We were talking about this with St. John's wort earlier. The reason St. John's wort got into trouble was some doctor wrote an article comparing it to an antidepressant, and forever afterwards, St. John's wort became an antidepressant. So in this talk, I first of all said, this idea of calling herbs anti this or anti that, anti-inflammatory, antibiotic, antibiotic means anti-life. Herbs aren't anti-life. And I said, if you're trying to create a person who has superb resistance and immunity, you're going to have to work on a number of different levels. And amongst them, you're going to have to work on the spirit of the person. So I very neatly brought Hawthorn into the lecture and ended up by telling them to all go out there, stop sitting around in their rooms and watching this stuff on the screen, go out there and make contact with Hawthorn, because she's out there right now. It is amazing here, Davyd. She's just all over the place. We drove back from Somerset to Cambridge. There was hardly anything on the road. It was absolutely wonderful. And all the way up the M5 onto M42, M6, A14, right the way into Cambridge, Hawthorn lining the roads everywhere you looked. It was like a guard of honor as we went back from our Hawthorn retreat. So anyway, that's me sort of going overboard a bit with the Beltane passion.
That's that Hawthorn energy coming through, man.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, in herbal medicine, it's such an important medicine. And again, one of these herbs that has such power to heal, but which is also completely benign in the sense that, you know, you can chuck, you know, gallons of it down your throat and it really isn't likely to do much harm. I wouldn't advise gallons, by the way, but it really is a very benign plant from a herbal perspective as well. So we use it mainly for any problem with the cardiovascular system, and that might include the heart itself. It might include the actual vasculature. It includes the cerebral vasculature and, you know, protecting people from strokes. It includes the lower vasculature, protecting people from intermittent claudication and peripheral arterial disease. It strengthens up the vessels, it strengthens the heart wall, but it also has a number of actions which include lowering cholesterol, lowering blood pressure, of course. I had the inevitable question in the talk that I did, as you know, there's all this stuff about the spike binding to the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor. So ACE2 receptors are, the mechanism by which some drugs work to bring down high blood pressure. So I was asked whether I would give Hawthorn to somebody with COVID, and and I kind of stalled because I didn't really know how to answer it, because I absolutely would, but I felt that if I said that, I might sort of bring some opprobrium on my head. So I kind of fudged it a little bit. But you know, my message was go out there and do it, take it. There was an initiative. This is serious. There was an initiative in the British medical profession, and probably wider than that as well, a few years ago, where they were seriously suggesting that anybody over the age of 45 should be taking a cocktail of drugs, including a statin, a beta blocker, and an aspirin, to prevent them from having a heart attack in the future. What they didn't say was there's also research suggesting that combination of drugs causes congestive heart failure later on, but let's leave that out of the picture. And my response to that was, okay, so if you think it's such a big problem, then I'll take your point, but I won't have any of that. I'll have Hawthorn, because it does everything that those drugs do, but in a way that is actually healthful, beneficial, and of course will bring that spirit into your heart as well. The heart is someday when on one of our podcasts I must talk a little bit about another subject that I deal with, which is iridology, because the heart in iridology is a really, really important location. It's an important thing to pay attention to. There's so many resonances there, and I think we could probably find astrological resonance if we tried hard enough as well. Yeah, the heart, if people are not in their hearts, then they're not going to be well. That's my ultimate take on the matter. So there's such a big need. There was a friend of mine, a colleague of mine actually, who's a practitioner of Tib medicine. That's Middle Eastern medicine, really. So kind of a combination of Ayurveda and the Greco-Roman stuff. And he came from Pakistan to live in the UK a few decades ago. And he and I were teaching on the same platform at one point. And he said, I'll never forget this, he said, when I first came to the UK, I said, when I go to another country, I like to look around me and see what grows in abundance, what grows in profusion, and then I know the kind of health problems that I'm going to be dealing with in that community. And he said, I came to the UK in May for the first time, and I just saw Hawthorn everywhere, and I thought, this is a nation of people who need their hearts to be healed. I thought that was really nice. Yeah, so big heart healer on a physical level, and also on an energetic and spiritual level too.
Yeah, totally. Wow, thank you, Pete, so much there. Just to ponder on for a second. But I mean, just to pick up on the point about the statins and the beta blockers, I've worked with elders, relatives mostly, who've been on warfarin particularly, and other substances like that. Absolutely had the fear of God put into them, that if they stop taking them, they're probably going to die. And in the end, one relative took took the opportunity. He didn't want to take those cocktails that you've described, and fairly easily he was weaned off them onto Hawthorn, and he's been happy ever since.
Yeah.
So you know, some of the directives that are given by our esteemed medical profession quite often, like you said, seem to be an inversion actually, and what is being offered is an inversion of the real potential of plants. And let's be honest, most drugs, in my understanding, originally come from plants that have been taken into a laboratory, changed into something they're not, and then served up as a medicine. For me, this is still one of the most ludicrous things going on in our world. Is like, you know, why do we feel arrogant enough to take a perfectly formed medicine out of the ground and in our godlike minds change it into something that we believe is better but actually hurts people? I mean, it's ludicrous, really. And of course, it's probably a trigger point for us both. But yeah, you know, for those people who don't live in Britain, this time of year, particularly, well, it's it. I mean, I would have said particularly in Wales, there's a lot of hawthorn trees, but it can be spectacular to see the shock white flowers across the hills, particularly in Wales. I mean, obviously you saw them on the way back yesterday too. And, you know, there are many different aspects to the medicine we can collect. We can make medicine from the flowers, but then we also have the berries, right? The berries come through and they make a wonderful hawthorn brandy tonic. You know, that's really quite a pleasurable drink, but is also medicine. So there's a lot that we can do with hawthorn, right? And I think that what your esteemed friend from Pakistan said is true. I observed one day in our local town in Wales that it was completely filled with dandelions. And I just got very strongly, this is a town that's got liver issues. It's also a town that has a traditional heroin problem and various other addiction issues relating to various strange policies of releasing drug addict jail people straight out of prison into the local town without any kind of care looked after them. I see these poor, unfortunate lost souls often walking around, never causing anybody any trouble, but there was a sort of underlying health issue in the town. Also, interestingly, it was a spa town that had the waters capped in the 70s and had become, the town itself had become quite sick ever since that had happened. So that was an interesting thing that I worked on for a while with a group of people, harmonizing the springs, the natural springs. And our ancestors, it's just an interesting side point, but our ancestors were very smart and they knew that it was never really a good idea to build on places where there was a high water table, because it's yin and it's a draining energy. So one of the things that often comes up in geomancy is when people get sick and they moved into a new house and they place their bed, in a new spot, that sometimes it's placed on an underground water stream, and then after 2 or 3 weeks, they can't get out of bed, think they're suffering from chronic fatigue, and what's really happening is it's just too much water and it's draining their energy. So to build a whole town on top of a place that has a very high water table is not such a great idea. But I think that the points that your friend made about the heart energy of Britain in particular, but this is probably a problem across most of Europe right now, I would imagine, is we're not in alignment with our hearts. And if we're not in alignment with our own heart, if we don't have love for ourselves, then how on earth can we be expected to love anybody else if we don't have that love for ourselves? It's a kind of a ludicrous idea, right? That we engage into through the principles of marriage and other things that we have to get permission for from the government, which, also a part of Beltane tradition was hand fasting, that often couples would hand fast at Beltane, and each year they would either renew the hand fasting and continue the partnership, or they would release each other from it, which I think in many ways is probably a lot more sensible, right?
Civilized, absolutely.
Civilized even, yeah.
And unfortunately, however, the lawyers wouldn't make as much money out of that.
Right.
I mean, yes, you're so right. And there's a lot of stuff to look back to there as well. But yeah, what you said about, how can you love anybody else without, and this actually also brings me to mind of certain formulations that we can see in the human iris in iridology as well. There's a position there that we call the inner heart, and there's a position called the outer heart, and the inner heart is your relationship with yourself. That's very much what I experienced when dealing with Hawthorn this weekend. It was all about my relationship with myself and learning to love myself better and forgive myself and release certain things that were holding me back. But then the outer heart, of course, is the way that you transmute that energy and put it outwards and are able to connect with other people. The heart is an organ of connection. It's an organ of collaboration rather than competition. It's an organ of encompassing and bringing people in. It has an enormous energy field. You know, the energy field of the heart is huge. And so it extends from each person. And if we could actually realize that and tap into it, we would be very, very different people. And I think that's coming. I got a real powerful message from Hawthorn this weekend about how, the heart space of this land is being held. This land, i.e. England, Wales, whatever, these islands, it is being held, and it's being held by these wonderful nature spirits. And I personally was sort of thinking, I'm so glad that I'm actually on that path and that I'm helping that to happen as well. I don't know what's going to happen, politically and all of that stuff, but I think, what you said earlier about the two tracks and deciding which one you're on is also really, really super important here. Because at a certain point, you just really have to do what you know in your heart is right. There's the heart again, and stick with that and just trust that everything is going to work out, because you have no control over what the mascot of Mayhem or Keir Starmer or the Musketeer are going to do, or Vladimir Putin or whoever are going to do next. You don't have any control over that, but you do have command over your own sovereignty in your own heart.
Yeah, and just on a point of amusement relating to our friends, I did have a fair amount of communication from the people that aren't there about some of the words I used about the people that aren't there when Uncle Joe was shaking the hand to them. So I just want to apologise to all the people out there who aren't there, that if I offended them, that I'm sorry. So, on that kind of amusing note, I think it's really important that, like you say, we can't worry too much about what these vaudeville pantomime characters are up to, because they're going to do it anyway. But what is really important is that if we want to ascend into a different way of being, let's call it the new earth trajectory, and part of that is being sovereign and meeting each other as sovereign beings. In order to do that, we have to be in alignment with ourselves, because otherwise we're bringing our misalignment into those interactions and relationships and encounters with others. And then we run the chance of misaligning them too, or probably at the very least not being able to connect so easily. So I think that, like you said, listening to the heart, and this is a big part of the intersection, I think, is like, do we still place our trust in the narratives being given to us and we follow those as our metronome or our compass, or do we tune into our direction, the other train track, which is in alignment with our heart, and in aligning with the heart is how we connect to plants. We cannot connect to Mother Earth and nature and plant spirits through our brain. We can't. It's impossible. And if we are, then I suggest that probably we're not connecting to those things. The only way to really connect to nature is to breathe deeply into the heart and open the heart and feel that love that the goddess and Mother Earth and Hawthorn and all of these other amazing beings have for us. And once we enter into that space and we live in that space, you start to realize that, the Musketeer and Blow Joe and Uncle Joe and all of these kinds of people, it doesn't really matter anymore. Let's not put our attention there. That's falling away. That old world is collapsing in on itself. And instead, we've been given an opportunity here on the opposite train track to go, you know what, I'm heading towards a different horizon, a different vision for myself, for the world around me, for the people I interact with. And it's based on unconditional love and being in alignment with myself and my heart. And, I would hope that our listeners out there will take away from today's conversation the importance of this, and how important it is that we find that space, and whatever it is misaligned within ourselves, there's probably echoes of karma that need to be resolved. And so I really urge everybody to look at the places where they see the misalignment or feel it in their life and really kind of own it and start to take action to change it. We're being offered right now incredible manifestation energies and the potential to heal and release almost instantly if we want. But we have to go into that space, sit in it, and then release it. And once we do, it's often amazing how quickly, once that space has been freed up in our energy field of the heavy burdens of the past, we create the space for newer, lighter frequencies to come in. We can absorb those beautiful cosmic rays that are coming in and feel the resonance, the Schumann resonance shifting within ourselves, and as it does, it shifts within the collective. Everything that we do for ourselves, we're doing for the collective too, right? And we've talked about this before. But we got lots of juice there for future shows. We're definitely going to get into a piece about iridology in the future. I'd love to go into that deeper with you, and also we'll focus on Ormus. But do you have a final thought for today before we sign off?
Only really to just echo big time what you just said about the enormous energy that's available to each and every one of us to effect those transformations within ourselves at the moment. This is not a time to feel, depressed or overwhelmed by global events or anything like that. This is a time to open ourselves up to the help that is there from the higher beings, from the plant spirits, from everywhere except all the stuff that's being beamed at us. So it's time to switch that off, actually, I think. That's my message.
Good. I couldn't agree more. And yeah, I feel 100% the same. We can observe what's going on, and I think it's important sometimes to feel the energy of the direction so that we can, be aware of it, but not to get involved in it. And really, this is a time where we get to choose, each and every one of us, how our future looks, but we also have to act on that. It's not just a passive activity, right? And it's just as a final thought that I just wish to bring to some of our listeners' attention is that I've had it reflected back to me from a number of quarters from other people who've been observing what's going on in the collective, and they sense that many people think everything is going back to normal, that somehow that life is going to return to normal, which seems to me very, very strange, but this is coming back from a number of quarters. And a couple of more astrologically inclined friends pointed out that this is really just a lull, that we are in some really, really beautiful energy right now. And the trick is not to put your feet back, get out the cocktail cabinet and have a good old time, but to really embrace the energies, work with them, bring them into the inner space and start to see the new technology that is becoming online in the different, within ourselves. It's part of us, right? It's not necessarily a physical thing, but it's an energetic thing. And so I just wanted to put that out there because I do sense that there is an energy that's sort of encouraging everybody to think that it's all done and that we can kind of kick back. But no, the new earth still needs to be brought forth, everybody, and it's going to take work. And yes, it's on the ground, but it's also a state of mind. And I think that's where I'd like to finish today. Let's call in the new earth into those of us that want it, because it gives us the different alternative of the future, right?
Blessed be, bro.
Blessed be indeed.
I have to say about that one. Yeah.
So thank you, brother, for another amazing round on the web. Hopefully we aren't going to get into trouble this week. I might have to review back and see if there's anything libelous in there, in which case there might be an edited version on YouTube and a completely uncensored version on Wisdom Hub, but we'll have to see. Either way, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you, bro, and I wish all of our listeners out there an amazing May. The energies really are brilliant right now, so just bring them in. Really, if you want to be in the heart space, bring Hawthorn into your life, or if you have access to San Pedrito, another great heart medicine, also bring those plants into your heart and just really let that heart space open and fill your field, and just see how much of an effect it has on the world and the people around you. So that's it for this week, everybody. Look forward to chatting with you again in 2 weeks' time, bro, and have yourself a great week. Ciao for now.